Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session, and today we'll be talking about highly anxious systems and how to shape leadership in such a challenging context. My guest for this session combined her extensive experience, systems thinking, and research on what it takes for leaders to function and thrive in systems that are under great stress. She's here today to share about her views and experience, and her name is Katherine Tyler Scott. Katherine is the managing principal of KI ThoughtBridge, a company specializing in an integrated adaptive approach to leadership development through change management, conflict resolution, and negotiation skills. KI ThoughtBridge's mission is the transformation of individuals, organizations, and communities. Katherine was the founder and director of Trustee Leadership Development, TLD, a program that worked with over 50,000 leaders and consultants and 1,000 organizations across the United States. She is currently chair of the International Leadership Association Board. Katherine holds a bachelor's degree from Ball State University, a master's degree in social work from Indiana University, and an honorary doctorate in public service from Christian Theological Seminary. She is a licensed clinical social worker, has completed postgraduate work in supervision and organization development, and Katherine is certified in conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation by the Harvard Negotiation Project. She is also licensed to administer and interpret the MBTI and the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory. She has developed leadership curricula and training programs and resources for the Community Leadership Association and several state and national institutions in the United States. Katherine has written extensively on the topics of leadership, governance, organization development, and change management. She's the author of Creating Caring and Capable Boards, Reclaiming the Passion for Active Trusteeship, The Integrated Work of Leadership, The Inner Work of the Leader, Discovering the Leader Within, and Transforming Leadership. And today, she's here. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Katherine. Thank you so much for being here in the Systemic Leadership Summit with us.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that wonderful introduction. And I am really looking forward to this conversation with you.
So am I, and hopefully everyone who's watching, because I'm sure that there's so much you can share from your rich experience. And I would like to start off with you from a broader perspective and look at leadership over the past few years. What are the changes and developments and shifts that you've seen and experienced in the area of leadership?
I think that we're learning a lot more about systems thinking, which is gladdening my heart, I can tell you. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest change we see is the change in context. Yeah. The volatility and volume of change is really head spinning for many leaders. There's a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, and ambiguity, and people are feeling confused about what is the most effective way to influence culture and to lead individuals now. So they're needing new skills. And the shift we see is from the top-down autocratic form of directive leadership to something that is still forming. It's not clear, but we think it's more relationship-based, and it's also much more inclusive and much more transdisciplinary and multimodal a way of doing leadership. And no one seems to know exactly what it's going to look like, so there's a lot of anxiety about how to teach, how to train, and how to lead. So those are the biggest shifts we see, and we also see a huge gap between what people feel are their core values and how those actually get lived out. And the extent to which there's a gap is heightening, I think, the anxiety and uncertainty.
Right. So it's about our understanding and our shaping of leadership in organizations and other living human systems like communities and societies, from the directive to more the distributed or the collaborative. And then there's also what our values are and how we then shape our leadership
Yes.
from these values, and what exactly is important when we're trying to lead a bigger context with many more people who are trying to accomplish something, for example, an organizational purpose.
So true.
This is also, I also already hear you mention the word anxious context and anxious situations. Is this something that leaders recognize in themselves, or are they still at the point where they recognize it in their environment? Because you referred to the VUCA world that we are in now. And so do they recognize it outside or also inside themselves?
I don't think that there's as much insight and understanding about the inner anxiety
Ah,
and
okay.
the need to touch base with that and to do something about it. And very few people feel able to what I call do the inner work. So
Yeah.
I think focus on the external behaviors, which I think is still a problem for leaders who are trying to lead in this VUCA world.
Mm-hmm.
You call it BUCA because it's easier to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it that way.
Yeah.
But I think realize that, and I think that they're focusing more on symptoms than they are on the actual causes because they're familiar with problem solving. You know, you have a problem, you fix it. And that's the old paradigm where leaders are all knowing and they can come up with a quick answer and a quick fix, but that doesn't work in this kind of context.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is a real challenge still for leaders. And they also feel a little threatened by someone actually dealing with their emotional selves, their actual being. And so they tend to be very guarded, and understandably. You shouldn't let just anyone into your inner life, but I think you have to be in touch with it so that you can be clear about the boundaries that you're setting and what you can and cannot allow people to do. So I
Right.
do think there's a lot of work in that area.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, um, what I'd like to refer to is that step from the outer to the inner work, also in our conversation. And I want to start off with a workshop that you led with Irma Tyler Wood in Brussels during the International Leadership Association conference in Brussels. And the workshop was called Leadership in Highly Anxious Systems. So, our topic for today. And could you share with us more about the onset for you to run a workshop about that?
Yes, I will. We actually work with a lot of corporations,
Mm-hmm.
large educational systems, and philanthropic organizations, all of which are undergoing significant change. So, if there's one word that I would hope that those listening to this program will understand, is that change is a very constant, omnipresent phenomenon that leaders have to manage. And change always exacerbates discomfort and
Yeah.
anxiety because people are being asked to go from what they know to something that they don't know, to the familiar, to the unfamiliar. And anytime you have people making those kinds of changes, you're going to create some anxiety. We see learning anxiety. That's when people are saying, oh, gee, what can I do to be better? How can I produce more? How can I be more productive? How can I make this better?
Yeah.
But debilitating change is when anxiety is so high that people shut down and they regress to old behaviors that really are not very productive and that are not creating the change that they desire. So we get called in often when that is the case.
Yeah.
And we felt like it would be important for leaders to understand what happens when you introduce change into a system
Mm-hmm.
and what can the leader do to manage it more productively and get people to the point of learning and not shutting down. So that was the precipitating reason for our wanting to do the workshop, helping leaders to understand how to lead through change.
Right, right. And so, thank you for sharing that because it's what I discover in my work with leaders is that introducing systems thinking is a hard thing to do, and also a change in their leadership is a really hard thing to do when it's not tied into that very complex problem of continuous and constant change and anxiety that's going on. If it's not tied to that, then it's a real hard sell, actually. So,
You're
so that's why I asked you that question about what was the onset and how did you position it that way?
Well, we were really reluctant to talk about inner work with business leaders in particular, who
Yes.
seem more threatened. They have to feel, they sort of feel like they have to be in control. So what we do is a lot of listening, and we
Mm-hmm.
call it diagnostic interviews. We never do anything with anyone without doing what we call the diagnostic interviews so that we can understand better their perceptions and their understanding of what's going on before we do anything. Even an interview is an intervention, as you know,
Yeah.
in a systems theory manner.
Yeah.
But we help people to hear their own voices. It's sort of like listening them into their own speech and understanding of this larger system that they're in, and that they're not the only person in the system that affects it, and
Mm-hmm.
that they have a lot of influence and I think leverage if they understand the interconnectedness
Yeah.
between all of the parts, which, as you know, is what you need to do when you're thinking from a systems perspective. And you need to see the interconnectivity. And you also need to know that you can actually intervene in one part of the system and
Mm-hmm.
affect the whole system. But
Yeah.
which part is it, without really doing this kind of what I call inner work?
Yeah.
Because you have to be able to read the reality that you're in accurately and realistically before
Right.
you act. Because when you act, I think there's a moral um, aspect to responding to what you read realistically. And so you should read it truthfully and then respond responsibly. And I
Yeah.
think that's what leaders need to learn how to do.
Right. Right. And also because of the role they fulfill, it's they are not the only one who is influencing the system because everyone in the system is influencing the system, but they
Very
have a
much
big impact on the system. And
is.
so when they rediscover this inner anxiety going on in them,
Mm-hmm,
there will be this awareness about, okay, if I am anxious about not being in control or not feeling in control, then
mm-hmm.
this will also impact the system. And then I may elicit a response from the rest of the system that I actually do not really want.
That is an excellent point. Excellent point. Because what we're really talking about is raising not only the level of emotional and self awareness, but a
Right.
consciousness about your own beliefs and values, your reactions, and also your behavior. And as you said, the impact that that behavior can have. The lack of consciousness, I think, is one of the most problematic things we see in leaders who inadvertently create the very culture and climate that they are not wanting.
Yeah.
And this level of what we call, it's iatrogenic, I think they call it in the healthcare field, where you inadvertently create harm where you're trying to do good, where
Yeah.
you're trying to create health, you create illness. And so I think you're so right about raising the level of consciousness in leadership, and that leaders need to understand what's going on internally so that they can monitor that and figure out how to respond in a way that helps the system and that doesn't, make it worse.
Okay. And so let's move and zoom in into highly anxious systems.
Okay.
So when do we call them just anxious and when do we call them highly anxious? And what are
Yeah.
some of the dynamics that you find or distinguish in highly anxious systems?
Well, there are several factors that we see, and you can often tell from the phone call that you get, what we call the initial request for assistance,
Yeah.
and what you hear from the person on the other end of the phone. You
Yeah.
can begin to ask the right questions to find out, is this a temporary crisis? Is this a chronic kind of state of things? And so we find that out by asking questions. But these are the things that we see in highly anxious systems. There's a high level of reactivity. And what we mean by that is that there is a quickness to get closure and to get an answer. and they want it immediately. So there's an immediacy to it. And they are solving a problem before they're really clear about what is the problem that
Right.
they are addressing. So there's that level of reactivity. Then the other thing that we see is that there is a lot of what we call group think,
Yeah.
where everyone is being asked to sort of be in alignment with one way of thinking. And we know that that is definitely a red flag in any institution where you have everyone thinking alike, and talking alike, and the person who is the odd person out is usually marginalized and not heard. So you're not creative ideas and thinking that you need to be nimble in this VUCA world that we just talked about earlier. And the other thing is that there is a lot of blaming and scapegoating.
Yeah.
There's usually a singling out of a person or a group of people who are the problem. So anytime you have someone saying they are the problem, and if
Yeah.
you would just get rid of them or fix them, usually that's a signal, Jennifer, that we're dealing with a highly anxious system, particularly if it's a chronic way of behaving. Again, chronicity is a really important thing.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of quick fix mentality. They're looking for absolute certainty and simple answers, and they want them yesterday. So if they're asking you to deal with a problem that's been going on for a decade,
Yeah.
and they want you to do it in 3 hours, red flag. That's usually a chronically anxious system because they can't tolerate it. They want it fixed immediately, and I think that's a real problem. So
Right.
blaming and scapegoating, and then the quick fix mentality. And the last thing is being stuck. These are systems that keep trying the same thing over and over, and they just try it harder and harder and harder. And the results are the same, but they're not learning. Again,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me just pause you there because so these are 5 dynamics or characteristics that you
Yes.
distinguish in highly anxious systems, and that
Exactly.
is that they are reactive, that there is groupthink going on,
Yes.
that there is what I call toxic behavior, so blaming, scapegoating.
Yes.
Then there is the quick fix mentality,
Yes.
and being stuck or being repetitive in patterns and not
Absolutely.
evolving or growing or moving ahead from where they found themselves yesterday.
Exactly.
Wow. So
Yes.
thank you for articulating it like that because these are exactly the characteristics that we see in so many organizations who are trying to keep up with all the change, and they're failing, and they know that they are failing, and the anxiety just gets heightened because there is no so-called cure for the reactiveness and all the other characteristics that we just mentioned. And many leaders feel that they, well, first of all, the loss of control, but also like, so can't I just get this A to B solution, this hype, preferably 4 steps or a manual that's going to help me take the organization elsewhere where we're not stuck in this situation. But usually they find themselves at the end of the rope because these hype solutions don't work.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think we can help them a lot by helping them to understand again what they are dealing with. In other words, we have to educate people about systems. Then the second thing we have to help them do is to realize that they are going to go through the very same stages of emotional development that the people that they are going to be leading will be going through.
Right.
So, and they need to know that, and they need to have worked on that before they try to lead other people, because people will pick up on the fact that you're not comfortable with conflict, that you're not comfortable with ambiguity, and they won't trust. You won't even have to say a word. They're picking up on your own level of discomfort. And the more you can be self-revealing and transparent and being honest about where you are, the more the people that you're leading will trust you, because they'll know you understand what is really going on and that you'll have some empathy. So the research shows in emotional intelligence that the leaders who are most self-aware and that is the cornerstone for everything else, are usually the ones that are able to create the kind of climate in which people feel comfortable and I think are able to take the risk to grow and develop. And that
Right.
is what you want in this particular reality that we're in.
Yeah.
People who feel like that they can be vulnerable. We're talking about a level of vulnerability
Yeah.
in changing because people have to be able to feel that they're not going to be done in, as we say, that that you will not, that you will have their back, I'll put it that way,
Yeah.
that you will protect them, that there will be boundaries that will not be invaded.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that if you have not done this level of work that you and I are asking leaders to do in whatever system that they are in.
Yeah.
And this is why this is such important work. It can no longer be seen as soft skills. It is the cornerstone, I think, for leadership, for integrated leadership, and for adaptive leadership, and for the future that we are facing, the future that we really don't know. It's sort of like the time of no longer and the time of not yet, and we're in that in between time.
Yeah.
We need well grounded leaders who understand the importance of having some core values that guide them through this, what I call navigation of change, rapidity, and complexity that
Yeah.
we are in.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is with emotional intelligence and self-awareness, leaders will be able to create a climate where people don't lose trust and where they understand that their leader, when the leader is showing where they're at and that they have a certain level of vulnerability, that they can trust their leaders to understand them so that they can take a next step in the learning process of being what I call and what many others call the liminal space, the space of the in-between, where, like you said,
That's a good.
yesterday's gone and tomorrow's not there yet. And we're in some sort of
Mhm.
almost nowhere land. And how do we stay grounded in a space that we can't really name properly? And
Yes.
so there's that piece of the emotional intelligence and creating a climate of trust where people can still move forward step by step.
Yes.
And there's also this space of dealing with all the complexity, dealing with, because from what I hear you say when you describe highly anxious systems, is that when leaders experience that they're out of control and their systems are stuck, it's usually because they are running from a paradigm that no longer fits. Could you speak to that more?
Well, I agree with you. I think they know what they know and they've been very good at it.
Yeah.
And you're right, they see that it no longer fits. The most effective leaders that we have worked with, and we had one recently, was the head of a huge school corporation
Mm-hmm.
who knew enough to know that he didn't know what to do and called in some outside help.
Yeah.
And he realized that the system was going to resist because this is what happens. It's just normal when you introduce change, even when it's a good change, you're going to have a level of resistance from, they say, about 75% of the people in your group are going to say, what, why are we changing? I'm
Yeah.
fine. Everything is going well. So if you're in there, being the cheerleader for the change and not understanding that 75% of the people you're talking to are not going to be able to hear you, then you're not going to be very effective. And that 25% may be already on the same page with you and already ready to go.
Yeah.
But there's some people that are still going to be in denial even when you get to the point of what we call nirvana, which you never get to really, but saying, yes, we've arrived. You still are going to have people who are emotionally just not there. And if you've done everything that we've told you you need to do, then you will be able to let those people go. And when I say let them go, be able to give them permission to say, this is no longer a fit for you.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you are not fit. You just don't fit here, and that we can help you find a place where you can fit. And so I think the leaders who are most able to lead through change are able to say what they don't know and what they do know, and they're able to help people navigate the unknown, I guess I would put it that way. And it is not easy. This is the thing that I want to stress. This is not easy work. This is very hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes strong ego, because leaders do need ego, but they sometimes have to say that there's something much larger than my self-interest. There's something bigger at stake here that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And I know what that is. And I can articulate it in such a way that it is compelling and that it helps people to quiet down and to say, yes, I can manage this. Because I tell you, I've seen people endure incredible difficulty and hardship because they trust the leader. They know who the leader is, and the leader has been totally honest and open with them. Mm-hmm. And is not naive enough to think that there aren't people in the system who are saboteurs, because that's always going to be there too. Not only is there resistance, but denial and some saboteurs.
Yeah.
So you can't be naive about it, but you can't be reactive. So you can't get in, because you can easily, this is the thing about these systems that are anxious. The leader can get trapped into being reactive.
Yeah.
And that's why that inner work in being a calm, non-anxious presence, a clarity about your own core values and what's guiding you in the principles, will, I think, help you really succeed in the long term.
Right. Right. And what really fascinates me in what you just shared about is the piece of where leaders do need ego. Because in this summit, I spoke with many other leaders and speakers, and we were at some point talking about no longer needing the ego. And so I am fascinated about what is the ego piece that you feel that leaders still need to have, especially in these times where there's so much turbulence.
That's a very good point. Well, we're shifting, from just focusing only on doing to being.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about being, you're talking about the emotional state of the system, but also the emotional state of the people within it, and the knowledge of the self-knowledge and self-awareness of the leader. And so the ego is your executive function. It monitors the internal and the external. So if you don't have a strong ego, and there is anxiety in the system, you will do everything you can to shut it down. So you will collude with the system's resistance and denial, maybe unconsciously. So a person with a strong ego function will be able to read the internal and the external realistically and know what to do and when to do it. That's why I think ego is really important. I don't mean someone who is I won't mention any names, who is narcissistic and full of themselves.
Yeah.
But a sense of themselves, a self-awareness and self-knowledge. And the person who's written a lot about this was Ed Friedman, who wrote this wonderful book, A Failure of Nerve, who really does explore in depth why this the psychological maturity and emotional health of the leader is so critical to the functioning of the system.
Right. It sounds like, because I haven't looked at ego in that sense before. For me, there's a lot of connotations around the narcissistic and the control-based. But what I hear from you is that having ego as a leader to you means that there's a stabilizing function. So there's a recognizing function. Oh, there's anxiety in the system that I am leading. There's anxiety outside our organization, and it's interacting with our organization. And that's something that you can then recognize and you can use the ego function to help stabilize the system. Because a highly anxious system is not exactly stable. Like you said, it's reactive and it's displaying toxic behavior. And it's not helping the system to move to a place where it's more healthy and moving towards the change that it's trying to make. And so, yeah, thank you for that explanation. That brings a whole new perspective on the ego side of leader as a stabilizing function.
And that's well said. And I also think that if you think about it, institutions and organizations have egos. They call it their public face.
Yeah.
But truly, you need to be able to filter what belongs to you and what does not belong to you. And what I find is that when there is this high level of anxiety, there's a lot of fragmentation that goes on in a system. And what you're really trying to do is connect, not disconnect. And so if you have a strong ego, you will be able to deal with that level without yourself succumbing to either withdrawal or regression. Because the regression is it always happens in change. There's a little bit of regression, but you don't want that to be a permanent state. People are regrouping for the next thing that they need to be doing, and you want to be able to help them get there. But leaders who don't have strong egos, I've seen them, they take control, they become even more dictatorial, more authoritarian, and if you look at it from a country perspective, more totalitarian, more authoritarian. And so it's a vicious cycle. People look to that leader for the answer. The leader feels they have to give the answer. There can't be any deviation from what the leader has said, so you get the group think. And then anyone who is outside of that understanding is scapegoated. And so you can see how that all connects.
Yeah.
So this is why it is a stabilizing force. I really do think that, and that's why the inner work is so important.
Right. So it also what I'm tying it also to what you mentioned before about values. Because it also comes very close to identity, and that's also what we see in societies. There's so many different places in the world where there's groups and subgroups who want to separate from their bigger context and create closed borders around them. It's like the tightening of the borders because we need to have a stronger sense of our own identity now because we don't feel seen or recognized in that. It's a similar thing that's going on.
It is.
And a different way to respond to that would be to look again at what you said. What's the real problem here? What is actually happening? So there's nothing wrong with a system wanting to stabilize, but if it closes off and separates into smaller parts, then it may be very difficult to work with, and this is also something I want to discuss with you, to work with complex problems, to work with wicked problems. Because that's usually where systems thinking comes to the forefront. When we discussed wicked problems also briefly in our pre-call in preparation to this conversation, where you said, for wicked problems we do not have manuals. You can't open a book and then say, okay, these are all the steps, and if I follow them, I solve the problem. Wicked problems don't work that way. So could you speak more to that part also? What do leaders in highly anxious systems, what can they do with the wicked problems?
Well, realize that they are always going to be with us. That's the first thing you need to understand. But it shouldn't give you despair. It should sort of give you hope. You're going to have many, many chances at this problem, so you can't fix it right away. The other thing we know about wicked problems, Jennifer, is that you have to start working on it before you really truly understand it, which I think is really hard for people to grasp.
Okay, so let me repeat you there. So you say you need to work on the problem
Yes.
before you get an understanding of what the problem is.
And so, yes, the presenting issue may not be the real problem. So
Uh-huh.
you engage people in a conversation about it before you really can achieve any real understanding of what it is. That's what wicked problems are.
Yeah.
Like, you sit down, and also it just goes against the grain of the linear thinking that we all were taught about problem solving, where you define the problem, you look at the options for how you can solve the problem, then you try them out, and then you evaluate and you see what works. That does not work with wicked problems at all. So understanding that this is a very different level of thinking and problem solving that you're engaging people in. And the other thing is that these are problems that cannot be solved in your lifetime, generally speaking, but you have to come to a point of what I call sufficient. This is good enough for now, but that means you've really given it your all. You can't just say, well, I tried this in 15 minutes and now this is the answer. No, you have to really give it a good try to get to the sense of this is as good as we can get. Again, for now. This is not for all time. And you have to be able to live with that and to realize when it may be time to tackle it again. That is a different way of looking at it. And we know that complexity plus wicked problems equals fragmentation. And the only antidote is shared understanding and shared commitment. So the real work of the leader is to get to shared understanding and then get people to commit to what it is they understand the issue or the challenge, the adaptive challenge to be.
Right, right. So, Katherine, we are talking about highly anxious systems, and we've come to the point where we are discussing the wicked problems, because that is where we find ourselves in these complex change situations. And so, could you share more about the type of leadership that we need and how leaders can deal with the wicked problems? So what are they, and why is it so difficult to deal with them?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I think what we've said before still holds true now, and that is we need integrated, adaptive leadership.
Yeah.
And that means leaders who understand the difference between technical and adaptive challenges and technical and adaptive solutions.
Yeah.
But they also have to take into account what we call the integrated leadership, which is transdisciplinary and multimodal. If you want results, that you have to have leaders who are well-grounded, principled, have a sense of their core values, have a clear sense of themselves, know about boundaries, understand systems and the dynamics in systems, and are able to differentiate themselves from what is going on and don't become reactive and collude with the system and its tendency to regress when there's a lot of anxiety. So the leader who is clear about themselves has a real sense of self-awareness, but also, I think, social awareness, which is the systems thinking we're talking about, is able to manage themselves, but also manage relationships, will be the kind of leader you need in a time of volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. The qualities you want then are someone who not only has that sense of self-efficacy, the ability to act, but also the ability to be grounded in who they are, to have a sense of vision, to be able to articulate that, to have core values, have a sense of integrity, is trustworthy, transparent, vulnerable. This is beginning to sound like perfection, but what I'm saying is someone who understands what they do well, what they don't do well, what they know and what they don't know, and that there is an interconnectivity and an interdependence with the system and with other people in the system, and that you need everyone. You need everybody in the system to understand understand what is going on and to manage in the way they best know how, but hopefully at a high level of emotional maturity so that emotionality in the system does not overtake reasoned judgment or overpower innovation and creativity.
Mm-hmm. And so it requires a lot. And
It does.
what's now clicking for me in a different sense than before is that when you look at what is the type of leadership that's needed in highly anxious systems, is that leadership goes to a, how do I put that? Even a high, like when you look at leadership as a system in itself, it needs to meet and match the complexity that you find yourself and the organization finds itself in. And that's where all these ingredients come from, where you just said, oh, this is close to perfection. But actually it means that leadership is about meeting at the complexity level, and having the emotional intelligence on, and having the self-efficacy on, and having the bringing the inner resources of connectivity, of bringing trust, of stability, emotional maturity. All of these help to match the complexity level. And it's not necessarily that all needs to be in one person or one leader, but there's the leadership as a system, a role, a function that serves the organization that's dealing with these complex and wicked problems, and where we find people who are thrown into this highly anxious state, and where you can serve them by helping them to stabilize and open up to new possibilities or new ways of looking at the wicked problems they find in front of them.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think that's well said. I think what I want to say too is that when people are feeling anxious, they don't want to feel anxious. This is the issue here. They don't want to feel anxious, so they will have defenses against the anxiety.
Yes.
So this is where the leader has to understand that this can be very regressive, and they need to understand how they usually deal with these kinds of defenses against the anxiety. Because like I said earlier, too much is going to shut people down. Too little will mean nobody changes anything. So that's why the self-awareness of the leader is so important. And I also think you just struck on something really important. The interdependency of the leader with others in the system. And also the need for the leader to have what I call outside consultation, external consultation, someone who is not in the system, but of it, and can help the leader see themselves more clearly and see the system and then how they're interacting with it. And that's why I think the best leaders always seek outside help. Don't ask for help just when you think you're in a crisis, but always be getting it. Because we're not perfect. We're human beings, and we can't always read reality truthfully. So we need someone to help us do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, it's so easy, especially also when this comes from my perspective when I work as an external change manager or consultant or executive coach, is that it's important to not be sucked into the system too much, because then you lose your independent or interdependent view of the system, and that holds a lot of information that can serve the system. But if you're too much in it, then you'll no longer be able to offer that as added value to, in my case, my clients. And for leaders who are in the system, really need this additional viewpoint or pair of glasses or source of information also so that they can see. So yeah, I find that a crucial piece to touch upon, because I'm also looking at, so what is it then that leaders can do when there are strong currents, when many people are very anxious? What can they do to keep the system in a healthier place, while at the same time dealing with a lot of change?
Well, what we have found to be most helpful is to be mission centered,
Yeah.
or some people call it purpose driven. There
Mm-hmm.
is something much bigger than any one person, and to tie and connect people to that work is very inspiring, very energizing, and helps people to sustain themselves through the difficult times.
Yeah.
And so the leaders that's why you were talking earlier about values. Mission really is the home of those values, those core values that are inviolate, that should never ever change. And then there's some things that will change, but there's certain things that should not and will not. And people need to be tethered to those so that they can be grounded through these whirlwinds of complexity and volatility. So that would be the one thing I would say. The other thing is, I call it holding the institution or the other people that you work with in trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you think back to a time in your life when you had someone who saw something in you that you didn't even see in yourselves, and believed in you and supported you and mentored you and coached you and helped you grow and develop, that was someone who held you in trust.
Yeah.
And that was someone who saw a larger purpose in your life than maybe you were able to see. So you have that obligation and responsibility to pass that gift on to other people and also to the institution in which you work, if you care about it.
Yeah.
So you hold it in trust, and you hold it for a time you'll never see and for people you will never know, for generations to come. So there's something much larger, much bigger than you are.
Yeah.
That needs to be articulated by the leader.
Right. Right. Wow. So it's the bigger context, the bigger purpose of the organization and beyond that actually can help people to be on the healthy side of all the anxiety that's going on, and
Exactly.
to keep moving forward when there's so much turbulence. And the leadership is able to hold that for everyone.
Exactly.
Or,
To hold that space.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. To hold that space, to create that space, which is an interesting thing. Now, what you said earlier about being able to be in the system, but not, get sucked into it. It reminds me of Ron Heifetz's work about adaptive leadership, when he talks about the leaders sometimes needs to leave the dance floor and be up on the balcony to see the patterns, to see the trends, to see what's actually going on, and then go back in.
Yeah.
But to not lose yourself. And that's where that boundary setting function of leadership is so important. As much as we say the leader has to be accountable and responsible, they are not omnipotent and they're not responsible for everyone's behavior. People have to see that they too have a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And if you start taking on their issues and their problems, you're not going to be able to be very effective. And I see too many leaders taking on someone. I always ask, whose issue is this? To help them understand, are you taking on more than what you should be taking on? Are you undermining this other person's ability to function? Because certainly you can do that. You can give people the message, you're not able, you're not competent, I have to rescue you. I have to take care of this. And you don't want that. That's dysfunctional. And this is why we need outside, Jennifer, we all need someone who will tell us the truth about ourselves. As much as we do our own work, we need someone who will help us, who cares enough about us, the person who understands, who is compassionate, who understands the value of competency, and understands that it's important to be congruent, that what you say you believe, you're actually living out those beliefs and values, that they are aligned. And because you won't be trusted if they're not.
Yeah. And so, once again, to get back to that piece, is that there's beside all the outside work, there's a lot of inner work for leaders. In all the exchange that we've done so far in this conversation about self-efficacy and being able to have the right amount of ego, creating trust, and I love the metaphor about being in the dance and then looking from the outside, looking at all the dancing patterns, emotional intelligence, and so many more aspects of leadership. And so that's a lot of inner work. Could you share more about where for leaders to start looking when it comes to inner work?
Well, my suggestion is that they start with their earliest recollection of when they were a leader, or when they were first recognized as being a leader, and who was that person in their lives, and what did they say and what did they do. And usually when you hear those stories, you hear stories of service to others, relationship and connection between them and the other, that they realize that even though they may be very different, they're still connected, that they're both human beings, that there's respect for each other and a care for each other. And so then we ask them to look at other incidences in which they have been leading, and they begin to see a pattern in their own lives of leadership. And out of those experiences, they can extract core values, a sense of call, which is extremely important to leaders, and a sense of meaning, I guess, in their lives. So what we do after they get a sense of the narrative order of their lives, the history of their own service to others, and the meaning in their lives, we ask them about the mission, their core values and principles that have guided them over time. And inherent in that mission are some things that are never to be changed, but some things that should change, because in that is your sense of call. What are you called to do, and who are you called to serve? And I love what Frederick Buechner says about, you are called to where the world's deep need and your deep gladness meet. And in that intersectionality is your sense of purpose and call in the world, something greater and bigger than you. And it may change over time, but you have that sense. And then you have a sense of yourself, but also who it is you're here to serve. Who are the people that you want to be able to provide your talents, your gifts to, and what difference do you want to make in this world? And that then is the groundwork for your sense of purpose and mission longer term. And asking yourself those questions, which, by the way, are universal questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I called to do and be? Is central to leadership. So that's one place we ask them to do. Then we ask them to start to figure out, how do you live the question in your life? Because it isn't always about answers. Leaders don't have to have the absolute answers, and you're not going to in this world, the world that we live in now. But what is the question? What are the questions you need to be asking? The questions that open up the space of learning, that help other people learn and become all of who they can be. And institutions, I think, have a trajectory that really does, I think, change the world in positive and constructive ways. So living the question is really, really important. Embracing diversity and respecting it, not just tolerating difference, but actually respecting it and valuing it. And if you don't have anyone in your life who's different from you, then you really do have some work to do about why that is. If you're looking around and you only see people like you are not going to be an effective leader. The world is extremely diverse, and you need to be able to be culturally aware and culturally sensitive and culturally respectful.
So let me just reflect these pieces back to you. So what I hear you say, it's very important to, first of all, be aligned with that what's bigger than you, and to have that awareness of what's bigger than you, and the sense of purpose behind that that's present, and to have an understanding and a clear idea of who am I serving and what context am I serving, and and then and that it's not all about you. So that's one
exactly
very important aspect of the inner work.
Yeah. It's an instrument. You're an instrument of change and an instrument of transformation, and yet you also have a sense of yourself. And that's what I meant earlier about the ego. You have to have a strong ego, but you have to also say that I am here to do something greater and bigger than just serve my own self-interest. And I was saying earlier that I asked people to look at who held them in trust, and that out of that sense of remembering who held you in trust, that you are now obligated to express that to other people, to other institutions, and to hold them in trust for a time you'll never see and for people you'll never know, for generations to come. And that will be your legacy.
Right. So actually you're there to contribute to solving certain problems that will not actually be, by the time that they are solved, you will not actually be around to see it, because it's an ever-evolving process that we are working towards, almost regardless of the context we're in, whether it's a team or an organization or a bigger system that you fulfill a leadership role in. So that awareness of things that are so complex and also highly diverse, as you said, that inner work of holding more than one view or approach to life, and being able to hold different viewpoints and voices and perspectives and options as possible solutions is also part of the inner work, so that you can, when you're doing the space holding for your organization and the people in it, that in that holding there is space for all the diversity to be present and to be used as a resource to work on the problem as we're discovering what the exact problem is. Is that what you meant?
Exactly. That is exactly what I meant, and I would say as well that whether you're working in your own family, leading in your own family system, or in a work setting, community, or even in a statewide situation, which we've been in, that you actually are talking about holding other people in trust and helping them to become all of who that they can be.
Yeah.
And even if you're in a community, in a rural community where there is no one who looks like you, no one else who looks different from you, I should say, it's about how you value diversity.
Yeah.
It isn't about importing someone in to say, oh, now we have diversity. I've been in communities that have been all white, and they say, well, we don't have diversity. Well, you don't have to have diversity to respect it and to have the values that will contribute to a world that does value it. And I think that's what's important. And I think then once you get that, people will be attracted to you as a community, because you will be genuinely valued people who are different.
And then there's diversity and diversity.
There's diversity of humanity, period, and that is a wide range of diversity. What bothers me is when people want to water it down. Look at the issue that you're having around diversity, and it may be different in your organization or in your community, and focus on that. Not everyone is the same, and not every situation is the same, but adapt to what is, I think, in front of you, and don't deny or run away from it. It's just so disconcerting to see people denying what's right in front of them, because you can't solve it if you can't see it. And I think that's part of the struggle that we're having, I know, in my country. So we're working on it, though. We have to. We can't give up. We can never, ever relent.
No, we can't give up, and we can't. And we need to realize that it actually never stops. The work doesn't stop.
And so we don't despair. I do think it's important, Jennifer, to remind people that there is a sense of hope in leaders who really do affect change they feel inspired. They are driven by a sense of purpose and a sense of hope. And they want to make the time that they have really count.
Yeah.
Because it matters and it means something to them.
Yeah.
And they make the difference that they can. They don't try to be more than what they are or do more than what they can do. They do all they can do, though.
Yeah. Yeah. We are talking about the inner work, and it never stops, it never ends. And so what's important is that for leaders is to continue working on it and to continue. It's like building the bridge while crossing it. It never really ends, and the big ingredients that I heard from you are, on one hand, to align with the purpose and the bigger picture, and on the other hand, it's also to hold human diversity in the wide sense of the word. And so it brings me back to where we started almost at the beginning of our conversation, where I asked you about the workshop together with Irma in Brussels. And
Yes.
I'm just imagining this room full of people who are into leadership or who fulfill leadership roles. And when you share this message that you have around the leadership that is needed in highly anxious systems, then, and all the inner work that comes with it, how is that then received? What's their response when all this awareness trickles in about their leadership roles?
Well, we both had a very positive response to the message because we linked it to the research. Mm-hmm. What the research says is that 92% of the leaders who score high in self-awareness will have a very, very positive climate and culture. Yeah. They just develop very positive. 72% of the leaders who score low on self-awareness will create a toxic environment.
Yeah.
A negative environment. Mm-hmm. We also know that those who score high on emotional intelligence and have done their inner work, because that's what it really is, will be able to increase their productivity and their profitability. Yeah. So when you put productivity and profitability together, people listen, oh, there's a really concrete result here. Yeah. It isn't just navel gazing. Mm-hmm. It really is essential for the productivity and the health of an institution. Right. So they do listen to that. So we start with that first, and then we move to, this is what the research says, and this is the way you can develop it. Yeah. And this is one of the ways you can develop it. So it is continuing work. And frankly, it's about becoming a human being, a moral and ethical human being. Yeah. And that, to me, that is the basis of what we're talking about with inner work. I remember in graduate school studying with Carl Rogers and a book that he wrote on becoming a person. So that has been one of the influences in my own work in my life. Yeah. On becoming a person is like on becoming a leader. Or Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak. It still is about the inner work. And so it's lifelong. You never ever get to perfection. Perfection is completeness anyway. It isn't about being perfect. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a lifelong work. Yeah. And the leaders who engage in discernment, because it is a discernment of your purpose. No one hands it to you. No one writes it down and says, here it is. You figure it out. Yeah. With the help, with some of the things that we do. And so that's why we do a lot of conflict resolution work, a lot of helping people learn to listen to themselves, other people, and why we do a lot of negotiation and mediation work as well. Yeah. Those are skills that leaders lack. Because if you really embrace diversity, if you really value it, you are going to have conflict. Yeah. If you really are going to be leading change, you're going to have conflict. It's creative. It's innovative if you know how to handle it. So the important skills for people to have. And if you are a conflict avoider, if you don't like messy situations, you're not going to be a very effective leader in these days.
Yeah.
You might just want to, go read a book or write poetry. I don't want to demean any of those things. I do both. But you have to be one who can lead an institution through the changes that they're needing to go through, because you're going to lead people through the gap.
Yeah.
Like you said, that liminality space, that place of liminal netherland. You just have to really be able to be fully present and in the moment, and yet still see what is going on outside of yourself. It's just a really important skill. I don't think it's a gift, but I think it's a skill.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. You can teach people how to do this. There's some people that come to it naturally. I think I came to it naturally. In a large family, I was always able to see the system and my place in it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this is also a peek into your own life and your own leadership and how you shaped that. Could you speak a bit more about that?
Well, I was one of a twin, and I work with my twin sister. She and I were the oldest, and of course there was a lot expected of the oldest. But I have 6 other siblings and a very large family, born to parents, both of whom were from very small families. My mother was an only child. My father only had 1 sibling. They didn't always know what to do with all these kids. And my inclination was always some sense of interpretation and understanding what was going on beside what was going on with me. And I was able to articulate it and explain situations to my siblings. So that was sort of a natural thing for me. But then I've had it finally honed through graduate school and life experiences. And I had adults in my life who would point out to me that I could lead. I mean, I organized a whole neighborhood of kids one summer while I was sitting on the porch thinking, oh, this is so boring. I organized them, and we created a circus and a parade, and we charged our parents and made money. And I was like 8 years old. I was 8 years old when that happened. And later on in my life, when I was asked to run a conference of 30,000 people for the Episcopal Church, it was very much like that first parade I organized. Complexity and all of the diversity and all of the fun and all of the work. But it was like a harbinger of what was to come in my life. And if you pay attention to those experiences and to what people are saying to you and whether you're listening to them or not, you will discern what it is you're called to do and to be. And it's never static. It's never etched in concrete.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing this, because the inner work then to add to purpose and the diversity is also about what is my own system, my own family system that I grew up in and worked from, and how does that impact my leadership role as I fulfill it today, and what are the innate resources and qualities that I bring that enable me to hold something complex and moving and intriguing as a highly anxious system. So thank you so much for sharing that part. And
you're very welcome. My own, because I was held in trust, but also I had adversity in my life, but the being held in trust was very sustaining. There are people that we work with who have been dropped in trust. In fact, they've characterized it. And I say that even if you were, it's never too late to find someone who will hold you in trust. You should seek it out as an adult. Because once you've been wounded and you haven't been healed from that wound, you may be inflicting it on other people inadvertently.
Right.
So being aware and conscious is really important. Your own health and the health of the people you serve and the institutions you serve in is what is at stake. And ultimately, it's the community that will be affected by your health and your leadership. Yeah. So that's why it's so important. It's critically important, more important today than it ever was.
Yeah. And so We're almost at the end of our conversation. I have one more question for you.
Okay. Okay.
And that is, with all that we've covered in our exchange today, if there's only one thing, and I think you mentioned it before, but if there's only one thing that you'd like our viewers to take away from this session today, what would that be?
I would say the one thing I want people to always hold is the tension of the opposites, which means that you have to be an integrated whole human being able to connect the technical and adaptive skills with the outer work you must produce with the inner work that you definitely should be engaged in. And that is that technical, adaptive, inner, outer model of integrated leadership that I would want people to practice and to remember.
Right. Well,
yeah,
we've come to the end. Thank you so much, Katherine, for discussing highly anxious systems and the type of leadership that is needed to hold these systems and lead these systems away from their anxiety and more into the next step of towards their purpose and in their evolution. So thank you so much, Katherine, for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us and for being here in this summit.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been my delight and pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. And to everyone who's been watching, thank you so much for watching and tuning into this session today. I hope that you really enjoyed it and that there is some thoughts about inner work that you may want to do after watching this session. Or if there's some questions and remarks about that, then you can share these on our online community space. I look forward to meeting you there. Again, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.